My name is Claire Donovan, and I review financial fraud for a living. I know how credit scores work, how mortgage applications are processed, and exactly what a forged signature looks like in a legal document. So when an email landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning that said, "Congratulations on your new mortgage," I didn't scream or cry. I sat very still and read every word twice. A $623,000 loan. 30-year fixed rate. Funded 3 days ago. Primary borrower, Claire Elizabeth Donovan. I had never applied for a mortgage. I had never even looked at a listing. I logged into the bank portal myself, went through two-factor authentication, and pulled up the full account history. The loan was completely real. Then I saw the property address, a house in Westbrook, the exact town my younger sister Lauren had moved into 2 weeks earlier. I put down my phone and picked up my car keys. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Every share helps these stories reach someone who needs to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going too. I drove to Lauren's house without calling first. I told myself to stay calm, that there might be some strange explanation, that maybe this was an administrative error or a glitch in the system. I had worked in banking long enough to know that errors happened. But a quiet voice in the back of my mind already knew the truth. When I pulled up to the house, a pretty colonial with white shutters and a freshly painted front door, my stomach dropped. Lauren opened the door before I even knocked. She was smiling. Behind her, sitting on a brand new sectional sofa, were our parents. Mom was holding a cup of tea. Dad had his reading glasses on. Nobody looked confused. Nobody looked alarmed. They looked like people who had been waiting for a guest they already expected. That single moment, the absence of surprise on their faces, hurt me more than anything else that happened that day. I walked inside and asked Lauren as calmly as I could what was going on. She tilted her head and said, "It's just temporary. You have better credit." Just like that. Like she had borrowed a sweater from my closet and forgotten to mention it. I asked her how she had obtained my signature on the loan documents. She shrugged and said, "It was digital. It wasn't that hard." I looked at my parents. Mom reached over and touched my hand. "You weren't using your credit anyway," she said gently, like that was a reasonable thing to say. "You don't even own property." I pulled my hand back slowly. I looked at all three of them, my mother, my father, my sister, and understood something that took my breath away. They genuinely did not believe they had done anything wrong. To them, this was a practical solution to a practical problem. I was simply a resource they had used. I said I was going to report it. The room shifted immediately. My father's voice dropped low and he said, "If you do that, you will tear this family apart." My mother started crying, quiet tears running down her face, her hands pressed together like she was praying. Lauren looked straight at me and said, "You'll survive it. You always do." That last sentence was the most honest thing she had ever said to me, and she didn't even realize it. She wasn't wrong that I was resilient. But she said it the way someone says it when they have decided your resilience is their excuse. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. Nobody stopped me. I got in my car and sat in the driveway for 2 full minutes, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. Then I made the only decision that made any sense. I drove to a lawyer's office. My lawyer's name was Mr. Hartwell. He had 20 years in financial crime law and the kind of steady voice that made difficult information easier to hear. He listened to everything I told him, then looked at the documents I had printed before leaving my apartment. He did not blink. He said, "Your sister committed identity theft and mortgage fraud. These are felonies." He explained that if I did nothing, the loan would remain in my name. I would be legally responsible for $623,000. Every missed payment would destroy my credit. The bank could come after my wages, my savings, my future. "If you don't report this," he said, folding his hands on the desk, "you absorb the consequences of what she did." I asked if Lauren could go to jail. He said that depended on how the investigation developed. I thanked him, stood up, and drove directly to the police station. My hands shook the entire way there. Lauren called me before I even reached my apartment after the police station. I let it ring. She called again. On the third call, I answered. She was screaming before I could say a single word, telling me I had ruined her life, that I was jealous, that I had always wanted to see her fail. I waited for her to take a breath. Then I said very quietly, "How could I?" The same words she'd thrown at me, back at her. She said, "You're ruining my life." I asked her where my apology was. The screaming continued. There was no apology. There was no moment where she paused and recognized what she had actually done. Just rage, hot and absolute, the kind that only comes from someone who still believes they are the victim. I hung up and blocked her number temporarily. I sat on my kitchen floor and cried for the first time since the email arrived. 3 days into the investigation, an investigator called me with information that shifted everything. The mortgage application had been submitted from my parents' home IP address. Not Lauren's apartment, my parents' house. My father had been the one to upload supporting documents, including copies of my pay stubs and tax returns that I had given them years ago for a completely different reason. This was not Lauren acting impulsively alone. This had been planned. My father had helped build the application. My mother, at minimum, had known. I had to sit down when I heard that. I had come into this thinking Lauren had done something terrible, and my parents had simply found out afterward. Instead, they had sat together in my parents' house and assembled the paperwork needed to steal my identity. My own father had physically helped. I stayed on the phone with the investigator until I had written down every single detail he gave me. The bank froze the mortgage within the week. The title was flagged. The funds were held, and Lauren was suddenly unable to make payments on a loan that wasn't legally valid. She showed up at my apartment 2 days after the freeze. I heard her before I saw her. She was already screaming in the hallway. I opened the door and she pushed past me, standing in my living room, telling me I was going to make her family homeless, that her children would have nowhere to sleep, that I was a heartless person who cared more about money than blood. I let her finish. Then I said, as calmly as I have ever said anything in my life, "You did that." She stared at me. I pointed at the door. She slapped her palm against it hard on her way out. I locked it behind her and called Mr. Hartwell to report that she had come to my home. The next morning, there was a knock at my door. It was Lauren's husband, Marcus. He was a quiet, steady man who worked in construction and had always been kind to me at family dinners. He looked exhausted. He said Lauren had told him that the mortgage had been approved through a normal process and that part of the down payment had come from a family inheritance. He had believed her completely. I sat with him at my kitchen table and showed him the actual documents, the application, the forged signature, the IP address records, the timeline. I watched his face go from confused to pale to something I can only describe as devastated. He kept saying, "She told me it was an inheritance." She had lied to her own husband the same way she had lied to the bank. He thanked me quietly, stood up, and left. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The investigation expanded. The mortgage broker who had processed the application was a longtime family friend of my father's, a man named Mr. Briggs who had been at family barbecues and Christmas dinners for as long as I could remember. Investigators found that he had bypassed standard identity verification procedures because he trusted the family. He had not confirmed my identity directly. He had not followed the required steps. He said in his statement that my father had vouched for everything. Now Mr. Briggs was under regulatory review and facing the potential loss of his license. What had started as what my family called a temporary arrangement had grown into something far larger: identity theft, mortgage fraud, and a conspiracy that involved at least 4 people. I sat in Mr. Hartwell's office and listened to the updated list of charges. Each one landed like something heavy falling from a shelf. My parents came to my apartment on a Thursday night. I saw them through the peephole before I opened the door. Mom looking smaller than I had ever seen her, Dad standing slightly behind her with his hands in his pockets. I let them in. Mom sat on the couch and whispered the word, "please," before she said anything else. She said to drop it, to let it go, to think about what this was doing to the family. Dad stood by the window and said, without meeting my eyes, that if things went further, he could lose everything. His savings, his reputation. I waited for both of them to finish. Then I asked one question. I said, "Why didn't either of you think about me losing everything?" The room went completely quiet. They looked at each other. Neither of them answered. That silence was its own kind of answer, and it told me more than any explanation could have. Within days, extended family members started calling. Apparently, Lauren had been telling people that I had misunderstood the situation, that it was a complicated financial arrangement that I was blowing out of proportion. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly calling to ask if I was okay in a tone that meant they thought I was overreacting. My aunt called and said, gently but clearly, that family should handle things privately. I didn't argue with any of them. I simply gathered the key mortgage documents, the application, the forged signature page, and the IP address report, and sent copies to my aunt. I didn't write an explanation or an emotional message. I just let the paperwork speak. The calls stopped within 24 hours. Nobody called me dramatic again. The documents had said everything that needed to be said, more clearly and permanently than I ever could. A few weeks after the investigation began, Lauren's husband Marcus moved out of the house. I heard this through my aunt, who had become quietly sympathetic to my side after seeing the documents. Marcus had told Lauren he could not rebuild trust with someone who had lied to him about something that fundamental. Lauren blamed me, of course. She sent a message through a cousin saying I had poisoned him against her. I read that message and felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a deep and quiet sadness. I hadn't said a single word to Marcus beyond showing him the truth. I hadn't told him what to feel or what to do. Lauren had made every choice that led to that moment, long before I walked into her house that first morning. The truth had simply arrived, the way it always does eventually, and she had no one to blame for what it cost her. Lauren apparently consulted someone about suing me for emotional distress. Word reached Mr. Hartwell through the opposing side, and he called me to let me know. I asked him how seriously to take it. He paused for exactly 1 second, then said she would have to walk into a courtroom and explain the basis for her distress, which would require her to describe what she did to you in detail under oath. Then he said something I hadn't expected. He almost laughed. The threat went nowhere. There were no more messages about lawsuits after that. What it told me was that Lauren was still looking for a way to put me on the defensive, still searching for some angle that would flip the story and make her the injured party. Each attempt failed because the facts were completely fixed. She had done what she had done. No courtroom filing could rearrange that. 6 weeks into the investigation, the forensic audit results came back. A digital forensics team had examined the signature on the mortgage application and compared it to verified samples of my actual signature from bank records, tax filings, and previous financial documents. The conclusion was unambiguous. The signature on the mortgage was a digital forgery. It did not match my natural signing patterns, the pressure points were inconsistent, and the metadata showed the document had been altered after the original was generated. There was no longer any gray area. My sister had committed felony fraud. My father had assisted in the process. The mortgage broker had violated federal lending regulations. The district attorney's office contacted Mr. Hartwell and requested a meeting to discuss next steps. I sat in my apartment that evening, reading the forensic report for the second time, and understood that this had now moved far beyond my family's kitchen table. The district attorney offered Lauren a deal. If she signed a written confession admitting she had used my identity knowingly and without my consent, and if she agreed to a repayment plan for associated losses, the office would consider reduced charges. If she refused, the case would proceed to trial. Prison was a real possibility. Mr. Hartwell walked me through what each path meant. I told him I wasn't trying to send my sister to prison. He said that wasn't exactly my call anymore. The DA's office had jurisdiction over the charges. But my cooperation and my preferences would factor into their decisions. I thought about that for a long time that night. I wasn't filled with the satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, I felt a kind of dull fear, not for Lauren exactly, but for what this entire situation had already permanently done to every relationship in my family, and what a trial would do to what remained. While Lauren considered the DA's offer, my father tried to reframe the story. He told the investigator that the entire plan had been Lauren's idea, that he had simply helped with paperwork without fully understanding the legal implications. Lauren, when she heard that, was furious. She told her lawyer that Dad had been the one to suggest using my credit in the first place, that she had been reluctant, that he had pushed her forward. For the first time since this began, they stopped presenting a unified front. I watched through Mr. Hartwell as their accounts shifted and contradicted each other. The family that had sat together on that sectional sofa, calm and prepared for my arrival, had fractured under the pressure of accountability. They had been willing to sacrifice me to protect their plan. Now they were willing to sacrifice each other to protect themselves. Lauren signed the confession. It arrived through the DA's office, a formal written statement in which she acknowledged that she had used my identity without my consent, knowingly submitted fraudulent documents in my name, and understood that these actions constituted a crime. I read it at Mr. Hartwell's office. He watched my face while I read. I had expected to feel something large: relief, victory, the particular satisfaction of being formally proven right. Instead, I felt very tired. The words on the page confirmed what I had known since the morning the email arrived. They confirmed what every person in that room had known too, even as they asked me to stay quiet. A piece of paper saying the truth was true did not undo the fact that my family had made that choice. It just made the record official. I thanked Mr. Hartwell, signed what I needed to sign, and drove home in silence. The consequences settled over the following months like a slow tide. Mr. Briggs lost his mortgage broker license. The regulatory board moved quickly once the forensic evidence was submitted, and he was prohibited from working in lending. My father paid significant financial penalties and was required to cooperate fully with investigators. Lauren received a felony conviction, reduced charges as part of the confession agreement, but a permanent criminal record regardless. The house in Westbrook was sold under distressed conditions, at a loss. The proceeds used to begin addressing the financial damages tied to the fraudulent loan. Everything they had built around that property, the furniture, the plans, the future Lauren had imagined, came apart. And in the weeks after it all resolved, my phone started ringing again. Different tone this time. Not anger. Not pressure. They needed something now, and I was still the person they thought of first. Lauren called me late on a Tuesday night, about 2 months after the confession was signed. I almost didn't answer. When I did, she was crying. Not the hot, furious crying from before, but something quieter and more broken. She said, "You've always been the stronger one. Why couldn't you just take this one hit for us?" I stayed on the line and let those words settle. That was the most honest thing she had ever said to me, and she still didn't understand what it revealed. They hadn't chosen me because I could handle it financially. They hadn't chosen me because they trusted me. They had chosen me because they believed I would absorb it quietly, the way I had absorbed other things throughout my life, and never make it anyone else's problem. They had counted on my silence, not my strength. Those are two very different things. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Owens about 6 weeks after the case closed. I hadn't planned to. I had told myself I was fine, that I had handled everything well, that I didn't need to process it further. Then one evening I found myself sitting on my bathroom floor at 11 o'clock at night, unable to explain exactly why. I made the appointment the next morning. In our third session, I said something out loud that I had never said before in my life. I said, "They have always been willing to sacrifice me for Lauren." The moment the words left my mouth, something shifted, like a window opening in a room that had been sealed for years. Dr. Owens didn't fill the silence right away. She let me sit with it. I realized that the mortgage had not created this pattern. It had simply been the version I finally refused to accept. My mother was admitted to the hospital 4 months after the case closed. The doctors said it was stress-related, elevated blood pressure, exhaustion, her body reacting to months of sustained anxiety. "I want to see her." I sat in the chair beside her bed, and she reached for my hand the way she had in Lauren's living room that first morning, except this time her grip was weaker. She looked at me and asked, "Was it worth it?" I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the right answer, the kind answer, the answer that would keep things smooth. Then I leaned slightly closer and asked her softly, "Was I worth protecting?" Her eyes filled with tears. She turned her face toward the window. She didn't answer. I stayed for another hour, then kissed her on the forehead and drove home. Some questions are more important than their answers. 11 months after that first email arrived, my credit was fully restored. The fraudulent loan had been removed from my record. The investigation had cleared my name completely, and every financial institution involved had updated their files. I contacted Mr. Owens, a different Mr. Owens, a mortgage broker with a clean record and strong reviews, and we began the application process for a home loan in my name. My name only. I gathered my documents, submitted my real signature, and answered every question truthfully. When the approval came through, I read the email slowly, the same way I had read that first terrible email almost a year before. This one said congratulations too, but this time I had earned it. When I signed the final closing papers, my hands were completely steady, because every word on every page was true, and all of it belonged to me. 3 months after I moved into my new home, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a wedding invitation with Lauren's name on it. She was remarrying someone I had never met. There was no note inside the card. No handwritten message. No acknowledgement of anything that had happened between us. Just a printed card with a date and a venue and a small map insert showing where to park. I stood at my kitchen counter and held it for about 30 seconds. I thought about what it meant that she had sent it, whether it was an olive branch, a test, a habit, or simply her way of pretending that time had smoothed over what could not be smoothed. Then I folded it, walked to the recycling bin, and dropped it in. Some relationships can be repaired with effort and honesty. This one had never offered either. The last message Lauren ever sent me came on a random Wednesday afternoon, almost 2 years after the email that started everything. It said, "You destroyed our family." 6 words. I stared at my phone screen for a long time. I thought about the sectional sofa and my parents' calm faces and the word temporary and the forged signature and the midnight crying phone call and the hospital room and the 38 years of being the one who absorbed things quietly so others wouldn't have to. Then I typed my reply. I wrote, "No. I refuse to let you destroy me." I read it once. It was accurate. It was complete. It said everything that needed to be said and nothing that didn't. I pressed send. Then I opened my contacts, found her name, and blocked her. Permanently this time. I set my phone face down on the counter and went to make dinner in my own kitchen, in my own home on my own terms.